Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for braving the traffic to be here. I believe there's quite a lot of jams outside, so people will probably be trickling in over the next few minutes. But we thought we'll start the proceedings for the day. Unfortunately, I couldn't be here yesterday, so my formal welcome and introductory remarks on behalf of CPR had to be postponed to today. So my apologies for that. But I do want to express my deep gratitude to all of you for being here for these 2 days to engage with what is, I think, one of CPR's most important contributions in the public policy space. Our work on land rights through Namita's fabulous initiative on land rights and property regimes in India at CPR. I think in more ways than one, the Land Rights Initiative really epitomizes what CPR stands for as an institution. In that, what we aim to do is not only provide deep, empirical, rigorous knowledge on issues that we work on in the public domain, but also complement that knowledge building effort by producing important public goods. And I think the report that we published yesterday and the work that Namita and her colleagues are going to share with us this morning on the Making of Land Laws database is really an example of precisely this. Their work is embedded in deep, rigorous research, but it produces a set of public goods that can contribute to public debate and public engagement with this critical issue that I believe is at the heart of what makes for effective, important, responsive public policy making in India. That's what CPR stands for, and the Land Rights Initiative at CPR really epitomizes precisely this. So I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to welcome all of you to this very important discussion, and we are grateful for your support and encouragement as we pursue this important issue. The issue of land lies at the heart of the structural transformation that India is going through, and in the context of this structural transformation, it really is quite stunning that we have very little nuanced empirical work that gives us an understanding of the property rights regime in India. And Namita's work and the Land Rights Initiative's work is a very important and critical contribution to precisely this. So I think what we're going to discuss today really is, in fact, at the heart of the conflict on land, understanding what the land laws look like, what the land law regime looks like, in order to be able to debate what's the most effective way to ensure equitable justice to the citizens of India. So with that, over to Namita and Ankit to launch the day's proceedings. But thank you all.
Thank you so much, Yamini, for that generous introduction and welcome. Once again, on behalf of the Land Rights Initiative, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's proceedings. We had a very engaged and productive series of discussions yesterday on research from two of our projects, on the first on land rights in the scheduled areas and the other on land acquisition. So today we are going to talk about present preliminary findings from an ongoing research project. So we are very much not even halfway through our research in this project. And so these findings are very preliminary, but I think it's good to actually get feedback and get engagement on these issues as we proceed with our work so that we can do it better. And so in some ways, if I were to characterize the proceedings yesterday and today, we are moving from the particular to the general. Because the first project for which we launched the report yesterday on the scheduled areas was specifically speaking about the issues faced by the scheduled tribes with respect to their land rights and other forms of affirmative action and representation within the scheduled areas of India, which is a particular legal regime. And then we talked about land acquisition, which is actually a very core legal regime that affects everyone, particularly in the scheduled areas and in the rural areas, but also significantly in the urban areas. And we saw that there was a lot of litigation legislation that was coming on these issues precisely from the urban areas, but that there was a lot of displacement pursuant to land acquisition in the rural and scheduled areas. So with this work that we had done, we actually realized that there are so many conflicting legal regimes, and that was something that we highlighted in our report yesterday, is that we have protective laws for the scheduled tribes, but they are pitted against contrary laws. And so then we decided that why don't we create a database of land laws, all land laws, first, and see if we can actually make some sense of the legal regimes. How do they intersect with each other? Which laws protect people's rights? And again, the people is not a homogeneous term. There are different groups within those rights. And I mentioned yesterday that even in the case of the scheduled areas, there are both protective and displacing laws. So you have the land reform laws, which protect the rights of scheduled tribes, but they also protect the rights of non-tribals living there, and they often intersect. So there is no homogeneous people as well. So can we try to make some sense of the legal regimes relating to land in India by putting together some kind of a database and then beginning to analyze it? And I think so. So in that sense, we are moving from the particular to the general. But the effort, even in the scheduled areas project, was actually to put together a lot of primary data, which just doesn't exist. So this is another exercise in putting together this primary data, so that all of us can think through and use this research to build further on. So as part of this project, we call it Mapping Land Legislation in India. Today, we just want to talk about the process that we have gone through in creating this database and share some preliminary findings. The team that worked on this research included Ankit on my right, and Upasna Chauhan, who was with us for a few months and now is doing her LLM in Cambridge. And of course, Soumya there has been an integral part of the research, as well as Shruti outside. So I want to thank all who's interning with the CPR. And Dona, who was here yesterday. So just want to thank all the people who have been part of this team. And also, I just want to remember some senior colleagues from CPR who have been very helpful to us in our research, and we've lost them since the time that the first project began. So Mr. B.G. Varghese, who was there at our first conference 4 years back in this very room and chaired the proceedings. We also lost Professor Mozumdar last month, who was also there in our first conference. And not at CPR, but someone who has been very significant to these issues is Mr. Dilip Singh Bhuria, who was also at a CPR conference one. I had the pleasure to meet him and just a month before he passed away, and he contributed significantly to these issues. So just remembering that there's an entire generation of people whose work has actually helped us to come further, and we've unfortunately lost them in the last few years, but hoping we can build onto their work. So without further ado, I'll get into the findings of what we've done and how we are doing this. So why do we need a land laws database? The purpose of a law is to subject human conduct to the governance of rules. The internal morality of law requires that laws must be publicly accessible for them to be genuine laws. Because if somebody were to make a law but people don't actually know what the law is, then they cannot subject their conduct to those rules. And therefore, rules should be simple, they should be clear, they should be certain of application, they should be general, they should be publicly accessible. Laws in India, so and another thing that came out yesterday is that we have significant institutional continuities between the colonial British state and the Indian state, and so we have many laws that are there from the colonial period. So, but throughout, laws were published in the official gazette, both in the colonial gazettes and then post-independence in the official gazette of the Union of India, the Government of India, as well as the state gazettes. So this is a requirement for them to be published. Only when it is published in the official gazette that does the law become publicly applicable. It may have been passed by Parliament and so on, but it has to be published. And this publication is as per the Government of India allocation of business rules. But what we realized when we started this work last year is that there is no publicly accessible database of land laws with the Department of Land Resources under the Ministry of Rural Development or any of the state government departments. So yes, these laws have been published over the last 200 years in the official gazette, but most of us were not around at the time. Many of the laws that are applicable to us today were passed. So how do we know what all laws are applicable to us? So the most extensive publicly and freely available laws database that we found is the PRS State Laws Database. And Chakshu from PRS, who was the creator of this database, will be joining us for the panel deliberations later today. But as we did our research, we realized that the PRS database on land laws is not comprehensive. We cannot speak of other subjects because we haven't done the work there. And because PRS was housed in CPR earlier, so actually we saw them as they did this very extensive process of creating this database, and still we find that it is not comprehensive, and we'll hear about the challenges they faced in creating it. And ultimately it yielded only 12% of the land laws that we have found thus far in our database. Our database comprises of 556 laws, and I will just speak about them. But PRS laws contributed to 12% of the laws in our database. Now, there are two types of land laws or any laws that are applicable. Actually, I should say three, but the two types of land laws that are enacted by the state. There are the laws that have been enacted by parliament and state legislatures post independence in India post 1950. So these are by democratically elected and representative state and union legislatures. But we also have a lot of laws that are applicable to us that were enacted by a non-democratic colonial British state. And the most well-known example of this is the Land Acquisition Act of 1894, but also the forest laws of the 20th century, which are still applicable even after the application of the Forest Rights Act. So there are many, many colonial laws that are still applicable to us. Even the Transfer of Property Act is the IPC. We have so many colonial laws that we really haven't had an input in as people, because there was no democratic state. The third, it's not there on the slide, but the third type of law is, of course, customary law, which definitely applies in the context of personal laws, and it applies to property in the context of inheritance laws and so on. But that is also something that, is an evolving thing over time. But, in terms of codified state statutory law, these are the laws. So, what we are trying to create with this database, it's basically a first attempt to create a land laws database for 7 states. And the states are Assam, Bihar, Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Jharkhand, Meghalaya, and Telangana. And actually, so we had selected Andhra Pradesh, and then of course the bifurcation happened. And so we have Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. But essentially, we chose these states because we had to start somewhere. And we have so many states and union territories, 26 states and 7 union territories. And we needed to start somewhere. And this was an attempt at getting some kind of a geographical distribution from east to west and from sort of north to south in a way. And at the same time, we also wanted to, having done the work on the scheduled areas and so on, we wanted to have at least one state from the 6 scheduled areas. We have Assam and Meghalaya. And also we have Jharkhand, and we have Bihar. And then we have, Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat, to get some kind of a geographical representative sample. Of course, it is not a completely representative sample, but that's what we had. And we also wanted to build on existing work done in these states. I think it's been pretty clear how much work has actually goes into this kind of exercise. So it's always good to build on existing work that you've been doing. So those were the states selected. So we relied upon the following 4 sources in creating the database. We started off with the PRS Legislative Research Database because that was the most, that was the only sort of freely, publicly available database of land laws, and of which we had observed the process of its making, so we knew it was quite reliable. Then we scanned government websites, where we looked at all central government websites who we thought had something to do with land, starting, of course, with the Ministry of Rural Development, but also the Ministry of Tribal Affairs and the Ministry of Shipping, Railways, Defense, and so on. And we didn't find, we found, obviously we found a lot of laws, but not enough. And so then we tried 2 other methods. One was to actually look at Manupatra, which is a paid online legal archive. But also, one of the things that we also wanted to have is that a law is the most authentic copy of the law is that which is published in the official gazette. But a lot of the laws that we found, we were not really able to find the official gazette copies, and we were trying to make an authentic, comprehensive database. So we also thought, so for 2 reasons, we decided to file right to information requests with various government departments. One, because, as I will explain, under the RTI Act, they actually have an obligation to disclose these laws in the public domain. So partly it was to see what we will find in that, but also to try and authenticate the laws. That can we get the official copies from you, the government of India, and you, the government in the states. Section 4 Clause 1 of the RTI Act, 4 Clause 1A mandates every public authority to maintain all its records duly catalogued and indexed in a manner which facilitates the right to information of citizens under this Act, and to ensure that all records that can be digitized should actually be made digitally available. Section 4.1b mandates every public authority to publish all its rules, regulations, instructions, manuals, and records held by or under its control or used by its employees for discharging its functions. Section 4, Clause 2 mandates every public authority to make a suo motu, which means on its own, make a disclosure of as much information as possible at regular intervals, including through the internet. And Section 4, Clause 4 mandates that all materials shall be disseminated, taking into consideration the cost effectiveness, local language, and the most effective method of communication in that local area. And the information should be easily accessible to the extent possible in electronic format with the Central Public Information Officer or the State Public Information Officer. So if we read all these provisions together, what we find is that there is an obligation on part of the government to make all rules and regulations that apply to their functioning or that they have made. I mean, they have not made because they have made the rules and the regulations, but it is Parliament who makes the laws. And if they are applicable to their functioning, then there is an obligation under the RTI Act to make them accessible, to disseminate them, to publish them, and wherever possible to digitize and make them available in electronic format. Then there is something called the Report of the Task Force for the Effective Implementation of Section 4 of the RTI Act, which says that every government department must come out with a proactive disclosure policy, indicating their plans for making information publicly available and indicating what information is publicly available and what is not and for what reasons. And particularly it says government records should be digitized and extensively networked, and that this information must be available in a user-friendly manner. It should be searchable and discoverable. It's not just scanned images. Previous versions should be archived and made publicly available, and all information available in electronic form should be networked and made available by the government. So, this is a report of the task force for the implementation of Section 4. So, it doesn't have the same legal binding effect as the rules, as the sections of the RTI Act, but it has to be read in conjunction with that to indicate that there is a strong legal obligation on all public authorities for proactive digital disclosure of all government and publicly funded data in easily accessible, usable, and searchable form. So we can infer that kind of a legal obligation on part of all public authorities. So from that, I think we can infer an obligation on part of the Department of Land Resources in the Ministry of Rural Development to create a central repository of all land laws in India, and similarly with respect to the state departments of law, but no such repository of laws exists anywhere at the central or state level. So now I want to talk about some of the challenges. So we filed RTI requests with various departments at the central ministry as well as the state government. And as I said, this process is ongoing. So here I only present some of the responses that we have received from various governments. So before that, first of all, I just want to give some sense of the extent of laws that we can expect to have on land. So these are entries from List 2 of the Constitution. Our Constitution is a federal constitution with a unitary bias. We have 3 lists which outline powers, subjects for powers of the central government, which are coterminous with the powers of the Parliament to make laws under List 1. Under List 2, we have state legislatures. Their powers are outlined under List 2. And then finally, we have the concurrent list, where both the central and the state legislatures have concurrent jurisdiction. These are all entries from List 2. Entry 18, which says land. So land is essentially a state subject. And basically, state legislatures have powers to make laws with respect to rights in or over land, land tenures, the relationship of landlord and tenant, the collection of rents, transfer and alienation of agricultural land, etc. Plus, they have the power to make laws with respect to land revenue, including the assessment and collection of revenue, the maintenance of land records, survey for revenue purposes, and records of rights and alienation of revenue. So that's a lot of laws relating to land, but they also have the powers to make laws with respect to regulation of mines and mineral development. However, that is subject to union control under List 1. Land taxes on agricultural income, duties in respect of succession to agricultural land, estate duties, taxes on lands and buildings, taxes on mineral rights. So there are so many legislative powers that the state legislatures have. So we can see that there will be many laws on all of these subjects. At the same time, there is concurrent union and state jurisdiction over land. So primarily land is a state subject, but there are many areas where Parliament also has a role to play. For instance, on the transfer of property other than agricultural land, the registration of deeds and documents, acquisition and requisitioning of property. And like I mentioned yesterday in our land acquisition report, we have found that there are 102 laws of land acquisition in India, 87 state and 15 central laws. Forests, management and disposal of evacuee property. Parliament recently enacted a bill on enacted a law on evacuee property. Recovery in a state of claims in respect of taxes and other public demands, including arrears of land revenue, the maintenance of archaeological sites and other remains that are declared by Parliament to be of national importance, management of trusts and trustees with respect to land. If in the Babri Masjid demolition case, basically, it's the court decision that came was on the property dispute, and that is between the Muslim Waqf board and the Hindu religious trust. So trusts actually hold a lot of property in India, especially the Hindu temples have a lot of property. And India is the only country where, the petitioner is a god. We have so many cases where the Hindu idol is the petitioner in the case, right? So there is a lot of land and property with respect to religious trusts and charities, and there's laws obviously regulating that. And then ports, except those declared as major ports. So we have a lot of areas where laws are to be made. There are a lot of laws. So how do central government's departments perform with respect to proactive disclosure of land laws? The Ministry of Rural Development, Department of Land Resources, Ministry of Defence and Ministry of Road Transport and Highways have some laws available on their website, but very few. These are only the latest laws. So when we say that there is disclosure, there is very minimal disclosure. Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Shipping and Railways don't have any laws available on their websites. Sorry?
Forest Rights Act is available on the ministry.
Okay.
FRA is available.
Just the FRA is available. On the Ministry of Tribal Affairs website? Okay. On the Environment Ministry's website.
Tribal affairs
Okay.
also available.
So we'll look into that. Then we looked into whether they have functional RTI cells, and we found that at the central ministry levels, the Ministry of Rural Development, Tribal Affairs and Home Affairs have functional RTI cells. We haven't actually looked at the other ministries. And with respect to the state law departments, they all have functional RTI cells, which is another obligation under the RTI Act. So when we filed RTI requests with the state law departments and the public information officers of those departments, this was the response that we received. The best response was actually from the states of Assam and Meghalaya. From Assam, we received copies of 16 laws in hard copy form, which are official gazette copies. And from Meghalaya, we received 6 laws in hard copy form and 12 in digital form. But essentially, they also, pointed us out to places where we could access these laws, and they have actually been the best in terms of making them already proactively available. Gujarat only gave us 1 law in hard copy form, and an online link was provided for others, but the laws were not really available on that online link. Jharkhand was the most egregious. Basically, any RTI we send them, they just sent a response saying the information is not available with them. And finally, we got a response from Bihar, again stating that the requested information was available online, but the link that they gave us actually, it was a Bihar state government website, which didn't have the laws. So that's the state of the responses that we have received thus far. And we realized by this exercise that actually it was not really a productive exercise for most of the states, and so we're not really going to continue with it. Except for, like I said, except for Meghalaya and also for Assam, where we got those laws, and also we got a lot of amendments to the laws, so we got a substantial response from them. Yesterday we spoke extensively about fifth schedule areas, and but for the few people who may not have been there yesterday, I just want to mention what the legal regime with respect to the fifth schedule areas is. And essentially these are areas demarcated under the constitution where a separate legal regime applies. These are areas that are tribal majority areas that are designated as such in 10 tribal minority states of peninsular India. So these states are Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Gujarat, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Himachal Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Orissa, and Rajasthan. And in these areas, the governor of the state has extensive powers of administration, and he can make laws, he can decide what laws to apply or not. And in consultation with the tribes' advisory councils, he can modify the application of state laws or implement new laws. But yesterday, the panel discussions revealed that the tribes' advisory councils are mostly defunct and that the governors haven't really intervened much. But the governor is constitutionally mandated to make a report annually to the president or as required by the president. So when we look at, so we wanted to access these governors' reports, and these were not available in the public domain. So then we decided to file RTI requests to access these governor reports. So these are the 10 states which actually have scheduled areas, and therefore for all of these states, the governor is required to file a report annually with the president. And this obligation is under the Constitution since 1950, when we adopted the Constitution. The Ministry of Tribal Affairs was, of course, only created in 1999. So, once the Ministry of Tribal Affairs was created is when you expect for things to be available with them. So, on the Ministry of Tribal Affairs website, it is listed what governors' reports they have actually received. And as we mentioned in our report, based on key informant interviews, we understood that, once the report is sent by the governor to the president, there is a lot of follow-up action that happens, and the report sort of goes between the two functionaries and the various officials to look into for clarifications and so on. So we understand that there is a process, but it is astonishing that we have only very few reports that have been received by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs as they have listed on their website. So for Madhya Pradesh, 5 reports have been received during the period 2009 to 2016. For Maharashtra, 6, Chhattisgarh, 7, Himachal Pradesh, 7, Jharkhand, 4, and Gujarat, 5. For Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, Rajasthan, and Telangana is, of course, a new state, and they are still struggling with things. But for Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, and Rajasthan, even though they have received, some governors' reports, none of these reports are publicly available. And when we filed our RTI requests, we were able to get results only for the states that are highlighted in green. So for Madhya Pradesh, we got 2 out of the 5 that were listed. For Maharashtra, we got 2 out of 6. Chhattisgarh, we got 2 out of 7. Himachal, we got 2 out of 7. Jharkhand, 1 out of 4. Gujarat, 1 report out of 5. So it's not clear why the ministry wasn't able to share all the reports with us. Like I said, it didn't seem to be a question of unwillingness. It seemed more a question of inability to find them in the records. And that also, of course, is is a violation of the duty to maintain properly indexed and catalogued records. But we also heard from Professor Sridhar yesterday about how difficult it is to obtain information. So now that's how we have gone about creating a database, and it's unfortunate that at the end of the day, most of the laws we got were from a paid online legal archive to which CPR fortunately has a subscription. So, clearly the objective of publicly accessible, freely accessible laws is not satisfied at this point on land laws. So now, based on the 556 laws that we have collected for these 7 states, as you can see, the bulk of these laws, 63% are from Manupatra. 17% are from various government websites. So we have got, like I said, some governments are good, like Meghalaya, and has laws that are available in digitized form. And then we also have 12% of the laws from the PRS state laws database. 6% of laws we have collected through RTI, and other refers to websites that may not be government websites. And the thing is, it's a long way to go, because we also have to verify whether all the laws are active and whether some of them are still applicable or not. But I'll mention some preliminary findings on that as well. Next slide. However, for most of these laws, our attempts to get the official Gazette copies have not really succeeded in entirety. For only 40% of the laws do we have the official Gazette copies. I think that's something, but it's a long way to go, because 59% of the laws we don't have. When we look at the state-wise distribution of whether we have official Gazette copies, for Gujarat and for Meghalaya, we have most of the official Gazette copies. So I think what is interesting is also coming out is that Meghalaya is not only good with having its laws on its online and digitally available, but also it is good about responding to RTI requests. Gujarat does have laws that, through various places we were able to put together, and we got the majority are official Gazette copies, but they're not very good at responding to our RTI requests. When we look at the language of the Act, 95% of all laws that we collected are in English. 13 laws which are 2% of the database, were in Hindi. 12 of these laws were from Bihar and one was from Jharkhand. Yeah. So now just some of the substantive findings, and this data is still subject to work and verification and correction. So, but just to get a sense, 93% of the laws, as you would expect, have been enacted by state legislatures. Provincial legislatures refer to laws that were enacted by legislatures prior to Indian independence. So that's a very small percentage. No, previous slide. The Parliament. This is not complete. We haven't worked on the central laws in entirety. So the yellow color, which is 9 laws, is obviously not complete because we know that there are more laws than that are applicable. In the case of land acquisition alone, we have 15 laws that are applicable. So we have to update, but we are still working on the central laws. And then we also have some laws which are, as old as those by the Governor General Council and so on. And we have to figure out whether these are still applicable or not, because unless a law is expressly repealed under the Constitution, it's still applicable. So next. Yeah, so for the work that we have done thus far, we can say that 95% of the laws are still active and 4% of them have been expressly repealed, that we know, but there is still more work we need to do within this 95% to figure out if they're still active. Now, the other thing is that, as I mentioned yesterday also, the way the British government actually made laws was very piecemeal. So, agricultural land, there were different laws. Scheduled areas, there are different laws. Wastelands, there are different laws. Urban land, there are different laws. And that's what the Indian state has also continued. And so what we find is that only about 82% of the laws are applicable entirely within the states. 17% of the laws are partially applicable to certain territories. So like defense laws will apply to certain areas, scheduled laws will apply to scheduled areas, and so on. When we look at the state-wise distribution of laws, we find that Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat together account for 60% of all laws in the database. Now, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana should be read with Andhra Pradesh because the laws of Andhra Pradesh are applicable also to Telangana. They have been adapted, and Telangana has been in existence for such a small period of time that they don't have a lot of laws that they have enacted. So reading them together, Andhra Pradesh is the largest state geographically amongst the 7 states that we have selected. Plus, we find that obviously the states that were carved out later, like Jharkhand and Meghalaya, have less laws because their legislatures have applied. But in many of the laws of Bihar to Jharkhand and Assam to Meghalaya are also applicable. So to get a full sense of that, we'll actually have to go through and make sure, they have just generally adapted all the laws. So in that sense, more laws will be applicable, but we still have to work out exactly how many. But it is still interesting. So, Andhra Pradesh, yes, it's a big state. Gujarat has a lot of legislation. It's, more, it seems to be a bit of an outlier. They have a lot of laws as compared to other states. And then 40% of the laws are from the other states. Because, Bihar is also a big state, very complex land relations, but not as much law. Gujarat, a lot of law. Now, we've also plotted a time-wise distribution of the laws. Can we see when we have a lot of laws that are being made? And we clearly see a period in the 60s and 70s where there's a peak of all laws. So here, the green line, the khaki green color, it actually represents original laws, which means a new law has actually been passed by state legislatures. And the red one represents amendments to that law. And then the blue line actually counts both the original laws and the amendment laws together. And so what we find is that there's definitely an increase. So 1950 is when the parliament and state legislatures are coming into being after independence. And so we see definitely an increase in legislation from 50 to 70s. And then we have, the legislation sort of tapers down, and Chakshu has joined us. So I hope he will also speak about, how parliament and state legislatures are legislating today. But also what we, interestingly, and we obviously are still unpacking this, but a lot of laws that are framed in the 50 to 60 period are land reform laws and so on. And then subsequently, you see a lot of amendments to those laws. So that's why the green line is not, there are not many high peaks except so the green line actually sees peaks in the 50s and 60s and then a tapering down. But the actual volume of amendments and legislation like that, it's actually going up and peaking in the 70s. But then somehow lawmaking is declining. So in the last few decades. So we have to think about why that is happening. If you look at the purpose of laws that have been enacted, then we find that the maximum number of laws, which is 29%, are land reform laws. And these laws have mostly been enacted during the 50s, 60s decade. But then we also have a lot of laws on land use. And this is a bit of an umbrella term at this point, but it refers to any laws where actually the government is trying to manage the way that particular land is going to be used, whether it is urban land use kinds of laws or special economic zones and things like that. So basically laws pertaining to land use. It's a very big term, and I hope that as the work proceeds, we can disaggregate it into further categories. Land reform laws include 5 kinds of laws: abolition of intermediary laws, which means zamindari abolition laws; abolition of Rayatwari land tenures as well. So that's the first scale of land reform. Then there are land ceiling laws, which put a ceiling on the extent of land that you can hold. And then there are redistribution of land laws. So all of those come within the land reform category. And within the land use category, as I mentioned, it's anything that may have to do with how the land is to be used. Then we have the land acquisition laws. So 102 laws of land acquisition, but only 8% of total number of land laws are there. Then, of course, we have a lot of laws on land taxation, revenue, and rent. And then the laws on decentralized governance would include things like PESA, which have implications with respect to land rights. So basically, at this stage, we have been very expansive in our understanding of what laws should be in this database. Any law which had some provisions that tampered or affected people's land rights, or gave them land rights or whatever, we have included for this time. As we refine our work further, perhaps we'll be able to identify which laws are squarely about land, like abolition of intermediary land and so on, and which are less significantly related to land but have some implications on land. But right now, everything is in. Then we also have land titling laws. And we also have some rehabilitation and resettlement laws, really small percentage, 4%. It'll be very interesting as we disaggregate by state each of these purposes, like which states have more laws on land reforms and which states have more laws on land titling and so on. So we have actually done this preliminary exercise, and where we find that the significant percentage of laws for Andhra Pradesh are land reform laws, the largest number, and also for Bihar. That's the pink in the graph. And Telangana we can ignore at this point because, like I said, most of their laws are in Andhra Pradesh, and there are only 2 laws actually, and they are sort of amendments to land acquisition laws that we see on the Telangana government website. So let's leave Telangana out. Let's just look at Andhra Pradesh for Telangana. So land reforms are the biggest section in Andhra Pradesh and in Bihar. But if you look at Gujarat, then actually land use is the largest component of laws. And similarly for Jharkhand, that's the red in the graph. So this is just to give a sense of which states have more laws in particular areas. And so that's where we are at this stage, and we welcome any and all feedback on how we are thinking about doing this database and what we can do better as we go ahead. Thank you so much.